Optimal health for high performers. This is the Health Upgrade Podcast with Dr. Nawaz Habib.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Health Upgrade Podcast. This is Dr. Habib. I'm here with my co-host, JP.
Hi.
And our absolutely wonderful guest, Dr. Terry Wahls. I'm very, very excited about our conversation today, Dr. Wahls.
Hey, I am so excited to be here as well.
So we're honored to have you here. I've been a fan for a very long time, and I want to share your story with our audience because your story is special and quite unique in the depth to which you were dealing with a chronic condition and how you were able to help get yourself out of that. So for those who don't know, please share your story. Let's hear a little bit about how you went through your journey.
So in 2000, out walking with my wife, Jackie, a half mile from home, my left leg grows weak. Dragging it, I hobble home. I see the neurologist who says, Terry, this could be bad or really, really bad. And so we go through the workup for the next 3 weeks. And at night, I keep thinking about the 20 years of worsening electrical face pain that I've already endured. So I know, okay, this is a progressive disease. I don't want to be disabled. I would much rather die. So I'm praying secretly for a fatal diagnosis. That'll be quick, much more quick. In 3 weeks, I hear multiple sclerosis. I do my research, find the very best MS center in the country, go find who their best physician is, see them, take the newest drugs. So I treat my disease very aggressively. Still within 3 years, I hear tilt recline wheelchair. I'm clearly progressing. My face pain's progressing. My 10-year-old daughter hugs me as tears stream down my face. And I have to ask myself, am I really doing all that I can? I go back to reading the basic science in PubMed. I decide that mitochondrial dysfunction are the drivers of disability. I devise a supplement cocktail that slows my decline, helps me just a little bit with my fatigue. Then I discover a study using electrical stimulation of muscles. I ask my physical therapist, hey, can I try that? He calls it E-stim. He says, this is for athletes. It's really quite painful. And you have a lot of pain. But he does give me a test session. It hurts really bad. But when it's over, I feel great. And we add E-stim. And now keep in mind, this is 2007. I have severe fatigue. I have worsening brain fog. It's difficult to sit up. So I'm in a zero gravity chair with my knees higher than my nose. I have one at home, one at work. I have walking sticks, and I can take just a couple of steps with my walking stick. And my chief of staff, because he's trying to pressure me into filing for disability, he assigns me to the traumatic brain injury clinic and have to start there in January. Now, I had this big aha, and Dr. Nawaz, I'm embarrassed now how long it took me to have this aha. Like, what if I redesign my paleo diet that I've been following for 5 years, based now on the functional medicine that I've learned, the basic science that I've been studying, and the supplement cocktail that I have. So, it's a few more months of research. I redesign my paleo diet. It's now very specific. I start this new way of eating December 26th. And then January, I go to this new clinic. I have to see patients without residence. It's a job I know physically I can't do. The first 2 weeks, I'm just observing. The third week, I see the patient, and it's not too bad. I'm surprised. At the end of the week, Jack and I I think I can do this. And my physical therapist says, Terry, you're definitely getting stronger. He advances my exercises. I now do my little tiny mat exercises, 10 minutes in the day, 10 minutes in the evening. Then we gradually increase that. And I began walking in the hospital with my 2 walking sticks, stunning everyone. And then with 1 walking stick, then without. And then in April, I tell my family I want to try riding my bike. And I haven't done that in 6 years. So on Mother's Day, we have this emergency family meeting. And Jackie tells my 16-year-old boy, who's 6'5", Zach, you run alongside on the left. She tells my 13-year-old daughter, you run alongside on the right, and she'll follow. And I get on my bike, and I bike around the block. And that big 16-year-old boy, he's crying. That 13-year-old girl, she's crying. Jackie's crying. And I begin to cry every time I tell that story, because it was at that moment that I understood the current understanding of secondary progressive multiple sclerosis is incomplete. And who knows how much recovery might be possible. So, I began biking a little more every day. My physical therapist is advancing my exercises. And then in October, Jackie signs me up for the Courage Ride, 18.5 miles. And when I crossed the finish line again, everybody's crying. My boy's crying, my girl's crying, Jackie's crying, I'm crying. And I tell you, this fundamentally changes how I think about disease and health. It will change the way I practice medicine, and it will change the focus of my clinical research.
There's no doubt that your story affects everybody. I feel the emotions myself. And for me, the image that I always come back to is the side-by-side of you in your wheelchair and a year later on your bicycle.
On the bike. It is striking. So there's a year's difference. And I want to make clear, people know I love the paleo diet. The paleo diet was not enough. I'd done that 5 years, wasn't enough. And I take a bunch of supplements. I still do. They were not enough. I certainly felt better with them. The eStim was super helpful and accelerated my recovery. The magic happened when I had that big aha, like, what if I redesigned my diet, to maximize the nutrients I was taking in supplement form? And that was stunning. It was absolutely stunning, the speed at which things began to get better.
So let's dig in a little bit into what that aha moment was like. I love aha moments, those moments in science where there's just that epiphany. It can't be described scientifically, that moment of like a realization that I have to do something differently from the way everybody else has done it, and it's going to be the solution. So you were talking about the paleo diet, you're talking about the supplements, you're talking about eStim, you're talking about the exercise regimen. Each one of them contributed, but my suspicion is that the sum is a lot greater than the individual parts.
Absolutely.
And let's dig into what that aha moment was. What was that thing that you thought? What, if you can go back in your mind and say you had that moment, what was the aha beyond saying I have to do things differently? What was that? What was the next step? It's like, I have to do things differently, and what it is that I need to do is X. What was that X?
I'm going to get back into sort of the spiritual component. Now, keep in mind, at this point, I've had clearly 27 years of relentless worsening. I can't sit up. I have really horrific levels of pain from the trigeminal neuralgia. I'm beginning to have brain fog. My boss is putting a job that I know I can't do. That's going to land on me in a couple of months. I'll finally have to take medical disability. And I have been coming to terms with I'm going to be bedridden, I'm going to be demented, and my trigeminal neuralgia is probably going to be permanently on. Am I doing all that I can to slow this down? Am I really doing all that I can? And I was thinking about the complexity of life, that how many reactions are going on constantly in my cells, that they're deeply interconnected, self-correcting, and keeping the various elements in my cells, the electrolytes, within safety parameters, because if they get too high or too low, I'm going to die. It's incredibly complicated. So supplements, yep, they're helpful. I know a few ingredients that my cells need, but there's probably thousands more related compounds if I figure out where I think there were 9, maybe 10 supplements that I was really focused in on at that time. It's like, okay, where are they in the food supply? If I maximize the food supply, maybe there's other compounds in that food that support this very complicated biochemistry that I'm doing. And the other thing that I was, there are several big decisions that I made. It was like, okay, If it's not organic, I can't eat it. And am I meditating really every day or not? I got to be more attentive to that. I was doing my little exercises. If I did more than 10 minutes, I was just flat out exhausted. But by God, I got my 10 minutes in every day. And when I was given the eSTEM device, I didn't know how long I'd get to have it. And it's like, well, I got to make the most of it. So it told me I could dial it up to as much pain as I could tolerate. I'm like, well, I dialed it up to as much pain as I could tolerate. My family would walk in. I'd be sweating, going, sort of grunting away because, I was at the end. And I was like, I got to be doing all that I can.
There's a great Scottish saying that if you think you've reached the farthest you can travel, you've gone only half as far as you truly can go. Mm-hmm. So I think you demonstrated that your initial vision of where the end was wrong, and you proved it to yourself and then to the rest of the world by pushing on, by continuing on despite all the odds.
And I was asking myself, are you doing all that you can? And the other thing that really helped me, JP, was, so my kids, I became disabled as they grew up. And I certainly in my head had, deeply troubled thoughts. I certainly felt very despondent as I saw my life, my dreams slip away. But I also had to reimagine what parenting was like, and that I knew my two children were going to have their versions of really terrible times that they would have to face. And I could either model that, yep, life, you're going to run into buzzsaws now and then, and you either complain about it and whine, or you do all that you can every day anyway. And I knew that I needed to model what I saw my parents model on our farm was, yep, life's tough, so what? You get up and you do all you can anyway. And I had known that's what I was going to have to model. Of course, it got hard. It got really, really hard to do that.
Right. If you had to go back and attribute your success and your recovery to one thing, you talked earlier about mitochondrial function and how really focused you were on making sure that your mitochondria were functioning well, healthy, not under oxidative stress, doing everything they were supposed to be doing. Do you, and I'm asking a question I don't know, do you attribute that as being one of the real key pieces of your equation?
I'm going to go back a little bit. So the first key piece is, what is my why? Why am I going to do all this work to try and figure things out and then keep working at it? So we have to grow the motivation to do the work. Once you have accomplished that, okay, I got that going. And as I'm slogging through this basic science, because I'm not a PhD, so I had to really slog through and teach myself a lot. It certainly it appeared to me that getting to have the mitochondria work more efficiently, more effectively was key. And at first I focused on supplements, then I focused on food, and then eventually I started focusing on, well, I can use electricity. Mm-hmm. And then I focused on, I can do hormetic stress. So saunas and cold showers and cold baths, breath holding. And as I got stronger, then more strength training. So there's been a gradual progression as I understand mitochondrial function and how we can rejuvenate our mitochondria more effectively. So gradually I get more tools in my toolbox.
That piece that you mentioned, hormetic stress, something that we've mentioned quite often on the podcast, but it's so heavily linked to that recovery process and being able to teach your body how to recover from those minor stressors. Talk a little bit about some of the challenges and practical ways that you went through that.
So I'm going to back up just a little bit. So before I went to medical school, I'm an athlete. I do martial arts. I do long distance running and black belt training in competition. And I way overtrained. In retrospect, I realized that I did not allow sufficient recovery time. And so I think that set me up to accelerate my autoimmune process. And when I began doing my mitochondrial resuscitation, I now realize that some of my early tinkering with supplements was actually hormetic stress for my mitochondria using nutrients, but it turned out to be super helpful. And then as I was training with my electricity, again, I'm doing a little bit of hormetic stress because my physical therapist worked with me at the pace at which I could reintroduce exercise. Because keep in mind, I am profoundly disabled at this point. I can sit up in a regular chair 10 minutes, only 10 minutes. Otherwise, I'm in a zero gravity chair or I'm in bed. In a zero gravity chair with your knees higher than your nose. Now, fortunately, I had been mentally clear. I was beginning to have brain fog. And so, the end was near in terms of my ability to function as a physician. But during that recovery period, when I'm reintroducing exercise, the dose of the exercise, I could tolerate it much more if I had my electrodes on and I was doing electrically driven exercise at the same time I'm doing my little volitionally driven exercise. So I got 10 minutes. And then, I'm tired and I recover and then I go off to work. And then I could get to 10 minutes in the morning and 10 minutes in the evening. And slowly, gradually, we're able to increase that. Interestingly enough, my physical therapist told me electrically driven exercise, if you do volitional exercise at the same time, 45 minutes will get you a bigger, stronger muscle. You're weak everywhere, have many muscles training sessions as you can fit into your day, you can do. So that's when I figured out, okay, well, I'm still working. I'm going to have to figure out how to do this while I'm at work. And it took me about a year, but I eventually figured out that I could take my device with me, wear it at work. Every hour I'd go move my electrodes, and I would have 10 minutes or 10 seconds, and then 20 seconds where I could really work, and then 10 seconds of pretty intense discomfort while I was doing my isometric. And if I was staffing residents, so I'm talking to people, then I had to have much lower current because I couldn't be grunting in the midst of staffing a patient. That would be poor form.
So the supplements that you were taking and that are supportive of mitochondrial function, let's spend a couple of minutes talking about which, what you used and what their purpose is and, what effects they have.
So, a couple of things that first, B vitamins, and then I came to realize that if you get B vitamins that are, quote, activated, so that first step that my cells would be responsible for, we could bypass. That way you could reduce the impact of genetic vulnerability. And so methylfolate, methyl B12, et cetera. And interesting enough, I've since done some genetics on myself, and I have several variations that lead to less effective mobilization of my B vitamins. And then we could look at minerals, zinc, selenium, iodine, magnesium, manganese. But zinc in particular, magnesium in particular, very helpful. Then coenzyme Q, certainly very, very helpful. Lipoic acid, carnitine. And that was and I also add creatine, branched chain amino acids. That was my core supplement cocktail that I was using at that time.
Sounds very much like that supplement stack focuses on that mitochondrial function piece, supporting the carbohydrate metabolism, supporting the fat metabolism, ensuring that your body's able to build up acetyl-CoA really effectively, and then get into the mitochondria being able to run through the electron transport chain really effectively and then produce the energy that your body then needed at a cellular level to function. That's what I would take from running the stack.
When I first started adding these supplements, I was just beginning my segue into all of this. And after about 6 months, I thought, nothing's happening. And so I quit. The next day was no big deal, but the day after, I just really could not get out of bed. Couldn't really function. And the day after that, I couldn't really function. And then Jackie comes in and says, honey, why don't you try your supplements again? So I took them, and the next morning I could get up and go back to work. And I thought, wow, that was really interesting. So 2 weeks later, I thought, you know what, let's try that again. So I stopped everything. And the first 24 hours was fine, but at 36 hours, I couldn't get out of bed. And, again, I waited another 48 hours and then took my supplements and could bounce up and get out of bed. And so that's when I said, okay, I'm figuring some stuff out that my neurologist doesn't know about, my primary care person doesn't know about. And, at that time, I was on the institutional review board. So I told my staff person I was working with, said, give me all of the brain-related studies. I want to take them all. I got better and better at reading the studies, reading the protocols, and then, occasionally picking up, well, here's a new idea that maybe I should try in myself. And I got, much more excited about spending some time every week looking at papers, thinking deeply. And I became absolutely convinced that mitochondrial dysfunction is what drives disability, brain volume atrophy, spinal cord atrophy, and immunosenescence.
For sure. For absolutely sure. You're preaching to the choir here on the importance of mitochondria.
Yeah.
So have you done any studies looking at some of the epigenetic factors that might have been at play as well, DNA methylation?
Well, you mean for myself?
Yeah, for you. Yeah.
I have not, but I can speculate some of the factors. And, I can think about early life stress. When I was 9, actually, I take that back, when I was 8, my sister died unexpectedly. My mother had severe postpartum depression. My dad was also struggling, and that created enormous strain for our family for many, many years. In addition, we can think about the atrazine that's in the groundwater in many private wells in Iowa. And so atrazine is a herbicide that's banned in Europe and much of the world. And it was probably the water that I was drinking. In addition to all of the background heavy metals that all of us are exposed to in the water and food supply. In addition, I'm an artist, love the oil painting. And so I had lead, mercury, cadmium through that. And then I got into metallurgy and soldering. So I got a little more. And then when I went to medical school, I am so thrilled to get to be in Gross Lab. I would go back to the Gross Lab, unwrap the cadavers, and I have notebooks full of these beautiful drawings of these cadavers. So I probably have twice, maybe 3 times the amount of formaldehyde exposure that many of my colleagues had. And, probably a little stress during medical school, not sleeping much. My vitamin D level dips down during medical school. And is it a surprise that my face pains begin to develop and become symptomatic during medical school? So, I think all of those factors are contributed to why I probably had some accelerated aging of my mitochondria. Oh, yeah, you should also throw in that, if you are a taekwondo in full contact free sparring tournaments, you get 2 points for kicking people in the head. So I certainly gave many concussions, but I also received a few along the way as well.
For sure, all those stresses will add up.
Yeah, there's no question. When I'm working with a client, I'm helping to kind of outline to them all of the potential stressors that have created the opportunity to go down this path. And I like to classify them into 4 areas. And you did a very good job of kind of explaining all 4 of those areas where there was childhood trauma and psychological stress that came up in your childhood, that there were biochemical stressors from the atrazine and from formaldehyde and all of the other chemicals that you were exposed to through your life. Your vitamin D levels coming down, that had a lot to do with potentially not being outdoors quite as much, not getting that sunlight exposure, the physical stress of being kicked in the head during Taekwondo, right? These concussions and these physical stressors are contributing factors, absolutely. And then the daily stressors of day-to-day life that so many people are experiencing. And so classifying those 4 and showing just how much they're pushing on that sympathetic nervous system, pushing you towards that fight or flight all the time, really helps to push you into that state where you are more prone to disease, more prone to going down that symptomatic path, where we're not in that rest, digest, recover, parasympathetic state quite as often. And so we need to learn how to be able to shift effectively towards the opposite side there.
Yeah, I think now, the way I think about this, Dr. Nawaz, is all of that accelerated the aging of my cells. And so, in retrospect, when I go back and look at the photographs of me at my nadir when I'm 52, I look really, much older than 52. I certainly was frail. That would have met the criteria for very severe frailty. That would have looked probably much more like a 70-plus-year-old.
So let me ask a question about your diet, your choice of the paleo diet, because you said that sort of predated your epiphany of how to approach this, required healing, because the next step wasn't so good. What drove you to believe that the paleo diet was the way to go? And you said you're still a big advocate of it. But I'm just wondering.
It's wild. It was my neurologist. That brilliant neurologist I had seen. I was clearly going downhill. And she pointed me to the work of Ashton Embry, whose son had recovered with a paleo diet. So at that, and I'd been a vegetarian for 20 years. So I had looked over the research that they pointed me to, read Lauren Cordain's book on the paleo diet, and I basically implemented what is probably we called the autoimmune intervention protocol. And this was focused on what to remove, not a lot about what to add or how to structure it. But still there was no grain, no legumes, no dairy, but it wasn't enough. It was not enough to recover me. I had the supplements, slows my decline, and I'm profoundly grateful, still not enough to recover me. But, I had very aggressive disease, and I was going down very rapidly.
Let's, one of the things that we like to talk about, and it's Dr. Habib loves to discuss this extensively, is the microbiome. And clearly, if you're a vegetarian for 20 years, and then you shift your diet as arguably radically as reintroducing meat and moving into a paleo diet, that's a very strong shift in what your microbiome is going to be dealing with, and therefore what its overall structure is. What portion of, I won't say what percentage, but to what extent do you believe that the microbiome adjustment and shift was an important component of you getting a handle on the decline that you were in?
I certainly think the food we consume is acted on by the microbes and everything that's in our gut. And those metabolites then get into our bloodstream. and help us run the chemistry of life. I think the interaction of the food and the microbiome is what is a very, very big part of all of this. The most recent study that we've done, which was a look at the low saturated fat diet in the Wahls diet following an observation period. And we've got microbiome samples, so stool samples from the observation period and the intervention period on 77 folks. And we are analyzing that with artificial intelligence to look at, can we predict who, based on the observation period, is going to do well during the intervention period and who does not do well. I think this is going to be a complicated question, and I'm looking forward to continuing to work with artificial intelligence to answer that question.
A great application of artificial intelligence to sift through all of the data that you now have, find the correlations and the causation. That's going to be.
And we collected plasma, red cells, and serum. So we're also writing grants to analyze the plasma and serum. So then we'll have even more data because we have more clinical outcomes. We know what people ate. We have the metabolome, and then we have the microbiome. So there'll just be an immense amount of data that to be sifted through using machine learning.
I'm very excited to see what comes out of that, because I know that the majority of my patients, when we put them on a diet that is initially restrictive, but they find that they do have very positive changes after a couple of months, having that data in advance showing which microbiome type of setup would be most beneficial or would likely have the best result.
I predict that we'll eventually get to a time where I can come in, give you some saliva, some urine, some blood, some stool. We'll run it through an analysis that will tell us, then come back and say, okay, given your parameters, these kind of dietary plans will be helpful. These kind of dietary plans will be less helpful. And this kind of targeted supplement program would help support that journey. And that will be guided by AI. How soon we'll get to see that, Dr. Nawaz, I'm not quite sure, but I certainly expect that will be one of the destinations that will likely come.
I think that's such a practical and useful application of it. And I'm really looking forward to seeing the results that come out of the study that you're doing there. I want to ask a little bit about how you refined your the paleo diet into the Wahls protocol and the factors behind that.
Well, again, eventually I had a list of about 20 nutrients. I was like, okay, these are things that I think are really important. And when I recovered, I just had a list of here are the foods I got to be eating every week. And then when I started thinking that I got to teach this to my patients, well, I couldn't just give them these big, long lists, one, because it wasn't approved by the VA. That's sort of complicated. So I had to come up with a simpler way. And that's ultimately how I created, the 3 levels of the Wahls protocol. And that we start with what you add. I didn't want these vets to be hungry. So there's 9 cups of vegetables. And they're like, is that per week or month? So that's very funny. And so, the 3 cups of greens, that gives you the vitamin K, calcium, magnesium, a lot of carotenoids, zeaxanthin, mesozeaxanthin, lutein. Great for retina, reducing macular degeneration, cognitive decline, cancer, diabetes. The vitamin K. Now you still need your microbiome to take the vitamin K1 from the greens to K2, but vitamin K, important for your teeth and bones, and at least in the animal models, we know really good for stem cells in the brain, oligodendrocytes, and myelin repair. So that's why the greens. And I'll tell you, I have 3 aunts, all of whom have severe macular degeneration. And the one aunt who listened to me and adopted the Wahls diet, she's still seeing and reading and driving, thinking clearly. And the other two, became blind and demented and had, really terrible outcomes. And then the colorful, pigmented all the way through, lower rates of, so again, lots of carotenoids, lots of polyphenols, and lower rates of cancer, cognitive decline, diabetes, all-cause mortality from that food group. Then we get to the cabbage, onion, mushroom family, so the sulfur-rich group. That induces glutathione synthetase. We all want more glutathione, so that's a good reason to have those vegetables. And more, it also really great for blood vessel health, great for detox, great for neurotransmitter development in the brain. And then for mushrooms, now you have to be careful when I talk about mushrooms. I have a lot of vets who would just go out and immediately start eating all the wild mushrooms. If they don't know, you got to be sure you identify it properly because they can kill you. But mushrooms, the more mushrooms you have, the lower the rates of cognitive decline, anxiety, depression. We have several mushrooms that have been shown to boost BDNF. So we really want people to have lots of culinary mushrooms. And then the things to remove, reduce, eliminate added sugars, processed foods. So the flour-based product. So gluten-free, things that are naturally gluten-free are great, but the gluten-free cookies, breads, all that stuff, flour-based products, not so good for you. Gluten-free grains, such as rice, a little bit would be okay. It's like, one serving a day, so half cup of rice. If that makes it easier for people to stay on the program, I'm fine with that. Dairy, you got to take dairy out. I let people know that milk is a great product for growing our young. Mammals have been doing it for 200 million years, but when they are weaned, they don't get to keep having milk. There are a lot of growth factors in milk that really help us grow rapidly when we're very young. Once our bones fuse, those growth factors can help us grow fat, not so good for us, or grow dysplastic cells, cancerous cells, also not so good for us. So, and furthermore, and then also took eggs out. Eggs, a great superfood. However, the egg albumin can be a common cause of abnormal immune response. And when I started doing my research, my university, in their wisdom, said, at first they disapproved the research, and then we met their concerns and we did get approved. But one of the things that they made very clear is I had to study my protocol, what had recovered me. And so you have this crazy diet, but that's the one you're going to have to investigate because that's the only data you have. And so that's the one I've been investigating this whole time because that's the data I have. And if I go off this crazy diet, my face pain turns on in 6 hours. So I never voluntarily go off.
Rightfully so. Thank you for that breakdown. It makes a lot of sense. It's very practical, and I think a lot of people will be able to benefit from that overview of the 9 cups of vegetables and broken down 3 per family there. You also have meat as a part of my preference is that people eat meat, fish, poultry. I do recognize that some people are vegetarian for their spiritual beliefs, so we talk to them about how to do that. And we have a ketogenic plan. We have a ketogenic plan that can use MCTs and coconut milk, which is quite delicious. And we have a ketogenic plan that uses olive oil, which actually is my preferred plan right now because I think that's more heart-friendly. Okay. And I have a more restrictive elimination diet for people who don't respond adequately to the basic plan. And is that more driven towards autoimmunity in particular?
Yeah, certainly more towards autoimmunity. We take out nightshades, we take out all legumes, all grains, and I may even take out the seed spices as well. But that's a temporary removal, and then we reintroduce foods one at a time so people can have the least restrictive diet.
Absolutely. And I'm a big fan of individuality when it comes to figuring it out, but you need a starting point. And I love that you've got this as a starting point, as a temporary solution, and then you add things in again.
The other thing that I do, Dr. Navaz, is I this is a family intervention. So it's a big conversation. What can you do successfully as a family? And if what you can do successfully as a family is the swank diet, that's fine. We'll start there. If what you can do successfully is the Mediterranean diet, fine. We'll start there. I will tell them which diet I think is the most therapeutic for them. But I also put the caveat in, we have to be sure that you really can do that. Because if you can't, then we have to negotiate a plan that you're okay with doing. And some folks can't do diet at all. We have to start with meditation and mindfulness. And I'm like, okay, if that's where we have to start, that's where we have to start. Because once they reduce their sympathetic overdrive, then they can tolerate the withdrawal they'll go through when they get rid of the standard American diet, standard westernized diet, and improve their diet.
To what extent do you think that some of the progression of your personal trials and tribulations medically had to do specifically with the failure of the vegetarian diet to provide you with all of the, for example, B-complex vitamins?
Yes. It was certainly part of it. I was probably deprived of the omega-3 ratio, certainly. We now know that I loved whole wheat bread, and that was certainly driving my disease. And, I would have eggs, and that would drive my disease. And I thought skim milk was okay. So, and those food groups were driving my disease. And many folks would look at my previous diet. In many ways, it was great. A lot of legumes, a lot of black beans, a lot of brown rice. I certainly had plenty of vegetables, but I also had, homemade wheat bread. Yeah, that was really quite yummy.
So I guess the question is, to what extent do you incorporate food allergies into your...
Oh, I think it's important to evaluate for that, to think about that. It's interesting to know that in the VA system, I couldn't assess any of that, do any food sensitivity testing. I couldn't do any functional medicine testing. I could do lipids, glucose, A1C, B12, homocysteine, vitamin D. That was it. And I could give a B-complex fish oil multivitamin, and that was it. But I could take a history, I could spend time, I could do group visits, and we became very good at the elimination diet in having, taking things out and then reintroducing things one at a time. And through that process, we could identify their food sensitivity issue.
You were literally having to live through the VA system with the Hippocrates, food is the first medicine.
And at first, I was so annoyed that I couldn't do my functional medicine testing at the VA. Later, after doing that for several years, I was so glad that I had been restricted, that I had to learn how to listen deeply to my patients, do the elimination diet, take everything out, gradually put it in, and that we had become so expert at motivational interviewing and health behavior change. We created this 15-step process that is basically the Wahls behavior change model that was profoundly effective at getting people to make big changes to their diet and lifestyle, which led to dramatic changes in their complex chronic autoimmune diseases. I was so successful that the VA national office came out to see, what's going on? What are you doing? And we greatly influenced how they created their whole life program.
Excellent. There's the reason I brought up the food allergies. It's a story that I think we've spoken with before on the podcast, but I'll raise it again. Good friend of our family. We were out to dinner. We hadn't been to dinner in a while. And I noticed that she, even though she's Italian, wasn't eating any bread. And the food that she had ordered wasn't a pasta. It was, she had a piece of fish. And I said, Anne, why aren't you having any bread? And she revealed to me that it really had gotten to the point for her where her gluten allergy had reached a stage where any kind of pizza or a piece of bread or a bowl of pasta or anything like that would leave her for the next day feeling like she had been hit by a truck. Swollen, joints aching, headache, brain fog, all of the typical sort of gluten allergy symptoms, but really very, very debilitating for her. And she had just cut it all out. And as much as she would like to have it back, she couldn't do it. And so I asked her whether or not, what it would mean to her to be able to eat that again. And she said, she would give anything. She was an Italian girl, and it was really difficult for her to give it all up. It was a social thing. For her, it was social. Comfort food was now being taken away from her. And so I suggested to her that maybe vagus nerve stimulation might be something that would be able to suppress the immune response that was being triggered by the gluten. And so I said, why don't we get you one and see whether or not it would work? And so about a week later, I had the opportunity to speak with her because she had one and she'd been using it. And I said, so Anne, tell me about your experiences. And her story was kind of startling to me. She said the first day she used it, she decided that night to just have one piece of bread, just to see what would happen. She was going to test it. And the next day she felt fine, which was abnormal, but she only had one piece of bread and she'd otherwise remained strict with her diet. But she felt it was so remarkable to her that she had no symptoms whatsoever from it, that she decided to sort of jump from 0 to 60 miles an hour. And that night she went out and she had pizza before dinner. She had a bowl of pasta with dinner. She had cake. She had bread. She even, when they went out to the boardwalk where they were at the Jersey Shore, she even had a falafel, one of those, funnel cakes. And she said she woke up the next morning, and the only symptom that she had was she had about 25% of the swelling that she would normally have in her left ankle, but it was not painful. She just noted that her left ankle was a little swollen, but no other symptoms whatsoever.
Wow.
She was thoroughly blown away. Now, the reason I had suggested it was because of the cholinergic anti-inflammatory pathway and the fact that the very first work that we did in developing a vagus nerve stimulator, a non-invasive one, was looking at allergic reactions. We looked at anaphylactic responses, and we were able to show that if you sensitized an animal and then expose that animal to what would be a lethal anaphylactic challenge, that the animal could survive that challenge if you were stimulating the vagus nerve. If you could stimulate the vagus nerve during that anaphylactic period, that onset of the reaction, that the reaction would be blunted and the animal would survive, whereas the others that weren't stimulated would die. So we were fairly amazed by the results that we got in that setting. But of course, EpiPens and other things work pretty well for treating anaphylactic shock. So it wasn't a business model for us to pursue. But I thought in the back of my head, I was like, food allergies, like a gluten allergy, is an example where perhaps that cholinergic anti-inflammatory pathway that's triggered by vagus nerve stimulation would be useful. So I wondered to what extent. The reason I asked the question about food allergies, I'm just wondering to what extent, and I think about it on a variety of different levels, but that might be one level in which vagus nerve stimulation would be a positive addition to your overall protocol.
It might be. I love electricity. I spend a couple hours a day doing e-stim still, even though I can strength train. This morning I jogged around the block. So yes, I think it'd be a very interesting addition. Yeah,
it would be. I would love to follow up with you maybe after the call about a way to study that. If you're in the mood.
Yeah. And I love electricity. I love tinkering. As you say, biohacking, figuring out what is the effect of these new technologies. Because my goal is to live and thrive to 120. Still be doing research, still having postdocs, still lecturing to the medical students and the physical therapy students, dietitian students.
When you reach that goal, don't give up.
Oh, absolutely. I'll go on to 150.
All right, good. Take them in 30-year chunks. I love it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love it. The research behind that is very specific, that vagus nerve has a lot of nerve endings at the gut in particular. Mm-hmm. There are some really interesting studies showing that vagus nerve stimulation prevents ultrastructure injury of the epithelial lining of the gut. It protects the epithelial glycocalyx that's being produced in the gut lining as well as in the blood vessels. So that's a whole nother area that it could be very beneficial in, and it prevented colitis when it's induced by DSS, like through injection.
Yeah.
We've talked about
with that electrical stimulation piece. So that electricity can be utilized really effectively when done so to prevent and to help support movement towards that parasympathetic state in a therapeutic sense. And I really feel like it could be a great addition to what you're doing, and that's why we're big proponents of it.
Yeah, the cholinergic anti-inflammatory pathway isn't just one pathway. The original pathway that Kevin Tracy discovered is through the spleen, but there's and obviously that has a widespread effect. But there's also a gut pathway that's separate. There's a central nervous system pathway that's separate. They all do the same thing, and they're all based on acetylcholine being released and interacting with the alpha-7 nicotinic acetylcholine receptor. But the interesting fact that we've only just really touched on a little bit on this on the podcast, but is fascinating in the context of mitochondria, is that that alpha-7 nicotinic acetylcholine receptor that is so critical for this cholinergic anti-inflammatory pathway is not only expressed on the extracellular membrane of the cells, it's also expressed on the surface of mitochondria.
Mm-hmm.
And it plays a critical role in mitochondrial function. And so the ability to increase the acetylcholine levels through parasympathetic activation in the vicinity, not just of immune cells, but of cells in general throughout the body, then it's a positive, supportive state for your mitochondria. So mitochondrial function is enhanced through a variety of different pathways that are associated with this, but directly because that alpha-7 nicotinic acetylcholine receptor is expressed on mitochondria. And when there's high levels of melatonin in the cell, the amount of, or the expression levels on the mitochondria for that receptor go up. So it's all interconnected.
It might be an interesting study to think about testing this device in a pilot way in people with MS.
We did look at it in the the autoimmune encephalitis model, the AEA model, in rats or mice, and the results were positive. They weren't as positive as some of the cutting edge medications, and therefore it wasn't something that we decided to pursue. But in a combination with other things, it was never studied, and I would think that in combination it would be supportive and helpful. But maybe it's because of what it does with mitochondria. I don't know.
It's probably multifactorial.
I think you're probably right.
Yeah, it's multifactorial. Certainly a lot of my basic science researchers get into the mechanism, that they have a model to study the mechanism really well. But my perspective is, life is way more complicated than one interesting mechanism, one interesting pathway.
For sure.
I completely agree with that. As a practitioner, and having that practical standpoint is really, and that practical vision from a physician standpoint is really important. And you brought up the fact that while you were working in the VA, you had this challenge of not having functional lab testing truly available to you at the cost and the burden of the system. That said, it made you a really good listener and a really very targeted approach as a practitioner.
Correct.
A little bit of
so it let me develop, as I said, the Wahls behavior change model, which is in the practice of group visits. So we became very skilled because I see a lot of my functional medicine colleagues very skilled at ordering tests, very skilled at here's a supplement, and not very skilled at getting people to actually make these substantive behavior changes that stick.
And so you need to use the VA. You need to use your 15-step process on the VA itself.
Well, I was very effective within the VA system there. I've influenced the VA nationally in their whole health model, which they are rolling out. And we train clinicians. So we are training clinicians around the globe in the Wahls behavior change model. It's lots of fun.
Excellent.
Talk a little bit about the program that you do offer to practitioners to go through that behavior change.
Yeah. So we have an online program, the Wahls Protocol Certification. There are 17 modules, little quizzes along the way to make sure you're getting the concepts. Then at the end, there is a case review with me where I take you through cases and discussions. And then there's a test. Yes, you will have to pass a test. And if you don't pass the test the first go around, we give you some remedial help to make sure you understand the material. We'll give you another shot. And then we have monthly calls with all the practitioners going through cases, answering all of the submitted questions, and periodically having guests. And you guys might be an interesting set of guests to have come along and talk about vagal stem, for example. So if I see someone that has an interesting technology that I think would be helpful, we may invite them to come chat with our group.
That would be very much appreciated. My wife is in the executive coaching space, and a lot of coaching involves at the psychological level getting people to make changes to their lives and change their behaviors and ultimately understand where their behavior triggers fall. Might be very interesting to have my wife interact with and learn your 15-step program.
Oh yeah. So that could be super interesting. What you could do is reach out to my team at va@terrywahls.com, explain her skills, credentials. She might already be eligible. If you have a health-related license or certificate, you're eligible. And then I tell people, if you don't, then contact us, explain why you think you are, and we'll address that case by case. Because the process of behavior change is where people are going to be successful in functional medicine, in conventional medicine, in executive coaching. I had the opportunity to work with our health psychologist, my own healing journey, and the healing journey of these vets, when my big tool was behavior change. Listening and behavior change. That's how I could work with these vets. And we had very, really, really basic supplements, B vitamins, vitamin D, a multivite, and cod liver oil or fish oil. And that was my supplement regimen. But man, we got amazing results. Just amazing results. And because we were in the VA system and we could monitor the electronic medical record, we could see the changes with the decreased medication use, weight loss, improved blood lipids, improved blood cholesterol. And I had to report back to the hospital executive team, the chief nurse, chief physician, chief of pharmacy, every quarter with what we were doing and the results we were having. Everybody was surprised, including me, with how successful we were.
Well, I think, one of the things, as I'm listening to you and as motivational as your story is and as motivating as I'm sure you are with your patients, I'm reminded of a story that I was told as a child by my grandfather, who was working at Western Electric, and he was an industrial psychologist. And one of the things that they were studying was lighting on the assembly line floors. And what they did was they increased the wattage of the lights in the room, and they found that productivity went up. And so they increased the lights again, to give even more wattage, and productivity went up again. And it got to the point where they put so much lighting in the room that the people who worked there started wearing sunglasses. And yet productivity was continuing to improve. And they decided that they needed to interview the people to figure out exactly why increasing the lighting was improving productivity, yet people were wearing things to prevent the lighting, wearing sunglasses. And the answer that they got was that the people said the changes that were being made demonstrated that management cared. And the fact that somebody cared about what they were doing meant that they would take pride in what they were working on.
Yeah.
And so the fact that somebody who is in a healthcare profession shows real dedication and real care is a big reason why
That's
people
huge.
get better.
Correct. Absolutely. In that relationship, in the group calls, in the group visits, and our big conversations around your why, your hero's journey, big conversations about facilitators, barriers, addiction, and the creation of mentors, and that we could be so successful with minimal testing, with minimal labs, and behaviors, community groups, and caring.
Yeah, that community groups and caring piece is really important. When we look into the literature and we talk about various ways that you can naturally enhance your parasympathetic tone, get yourself in your autonomic nervous system and your immune system in balance and regulate yourself, one of the things that we're constantly seeing is, yes, exercise, yes, proper sleep, yes, meditation and yoga and things like that are wonderful ways to amplify your parasympathetic tone. But being in a positive social environment, engaging with others in a positive way is so important. And it's one of the reasons when we talk about the Western society challenges from a health perspective, we a lot of times talk about diet, and we talk about the amount of time we spend in front of screens and the amount of stress we have with phones that we're on 24/7. There's no such thing as going home and just playing with the kids for the afternoon and evening. You're always on now with the smartphones and everything like that. But the other piece of it is the isolation of staring at a screen. The failure to have that in-person emotional,
connection,
physical, body language connection with other people. And I think that's a big reason why we're seeing such a higher level of somatoform disorders and psychiatric issues and physical issues that are the consequence of just a quantum shift in parasympathetic versus sympathetic balance. There's so much more sympathetic drive going on and so little parasympathetic relaxation, rest, digest, and restore mode in your community. So I've been really, trying to counsel people when I talk to them about the importance of engaging with other people in a positive way.
Yes, to all of that. Absolutely.
For sure. So, this has been incredibly a valuable time for our audience, a great opportunity to extend the conversation that you and I began at the A4M meeting, about 6 months ago, and then again on your summit. And it was really, we appreciate the fact that you decided to join us and give us an opportunity to speak with you further on and go dive a little deeper for our audience. Dr. Habib?
Yeah, just wanted to ask for you to share if anybody is interested in joining the practitioner training program.
Yes. So if you go to terrywahls.com, so TERRY Wahls, WAHLS.com/certification. There you'll get all the details about our practitioner program. And if you have anybody with MS, send them to my website, terrywahls.com, because we have a clinical trial comparing ketogenic diet, paleo diet, and usual diet, and we'd love to enroll your patients. So send your MS patients, even if they're on a special diet, as long as they're willing to be randomized, we'd love to have them.
Would be wonderful. And for all the practitioners and just listeners out there, this has been a masterclass for any practitioner who's gone through their own health journey, anybody who's had their own health journey questioned by anybody, and just the fact that you can put your willpower and your motivation to the test and actually come out the other side successful, stronger, and helping so many people. Dr. Terry Wahls, you've been absolute. It's been an honor to speak with you and to share your story and to see how far you've come since years ago when you were starting to struggle with those challenges.
Oh, yeah. And I'll get you the links to my social media and all that stuff, Dr. Habib and JP, so that you can put that with your show notes as well.
Yes, please send that over, and we will have all of that info in the show notes for anybody who is interested in learning more. All right. So thank you so much for joining us, Dr. Wahls. It's been an absolute pleasure. And if you got to this point in the podcast, please like, subscribe, and share with one person that you feel could utilize this information, because we just need to share with more people and help upgrade the health of those around us. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you.